Chapter 5. As soon as the question left Gabe's lips, an unexplainable longing flooded him. He wished he could marry Rory for real. He couldn't do that, of course, no matter how much he might want to. She was the girl he had hung out with most summers since she was 6 years old. He was like the older brother she never had. Of course it made sense that he would protect her. Gabe would protect her like a brother, not like a man in love. The only thing this marriage would be, all it could be, was a necessary step to help them both get what they wanted. Gabe looked over at Rory, the corners of his lips turning up as her jaw dropped in surprise at his proposal. A mixture of emotions flooded across her face with all the force of a rising storm. For a moment he thought she would accept his proposal, but all of a sudden her eyes narrowed as she turned to him. "Please tell me you're not asking me to marry you because you feel sorry for me, Gabe?" Rory crossed her arms, and he could hear her toe-tapping on the wood deck of his sailboat. "No, Rory, I don't feel sorry for you. I want to protect you." He could tell she softened a little at his words. "If it makes you feel better, you would also be helping me, too." Rory shook her head and chuckled. "How in the world would marrying me help you?" "Because of the stipulation Grand put in his will." Gabe went on to tell her that he needed to be married by his 27th birthday to receive his inheritance. "That's only a few weeks from now." "That's true." Gabe waited a moment as she digested this news. She uncrossed her arms and turned to look at the water for a moment. Gabe hoped she would be open to listen to his thoughts on the matter. "It's sudden, I know, but hear me out, Rory. I was thinking this wouldn't be a real marriage. We could agree to make this a marriage of convenience for 1 year. You would get $1 million, and I would promise to do everything I could to see you and your aunts protected. Then, at the end of 1 year, we would part as friends." The frown that showed up on Rory's forehead didn't bode well for her response to his proposal. A marriage of convenience. I didn't think people did that sort of thing anymore. "It's true. Most people don't, except it seems to be a thing in my family. Even my mom and dad's marriage started out sort of as a marriage of convenience." "Really?" Rory shook her head, and a look of surprise flooded her face. Gabe could almost see the wheels turning in Rory's mind. "Yes, in fact, to hear my mom tell it, at the beginning of their marriage, my parents didn't really get along. Yet they still grew to love each other." Gabe remembered those early childhood years and how his dad and mom were always kissing each other. He was reminded of his 2 older brothers and the fact that they were also putty in their wives' hands. "That's great that it worked out so well for your mom and dad." Her hands had a slight tremor in them as she reached for her jacket. Gabe helped place it around her shoulders. She peered up at him, eyes flitting back and forth with uncertainty. "I'm not sure, Gabe. I think I need a little time to think about your proposal, all right?" He slowed the sailboat so that it floated beside the long pier that stretched out from Walker's Island. Gabe nodded. He leaned down to kiss her cheek. "All right, Rory. I'll get back to you in a couple of days. I'll check in with you before I go to my mom's birthday party. You can give me your answer then." He threw the rope around the wood pillar they used to tether the sailboat. "All right, I'll see you later then, Gabe." Rory's cheeks were flushed red. She nodded quickly before she hurried off the boat and headed towards home. As Rory bolted away from him, a sudden unexplainable loss flooded Gabe's senses. He realized he missed her already. He looked forward to the next time he saw her. He only hoped, after thinking about it, Rory would say yes to his marriage proposal. If he were to be her husband, Gabe felt like that would give him greater liberty to do everything he needed so that Rory was protected and safe. Confusion filled Rory, and her thoughts swirled around at Gabe's sudden marriage proposal. He had been the man she'd dreamed about marrying for so long, she surprised herself when she didn't say yes on the spot. But her dream had not been to get married because of a marriage of convenience agreement. She wanted a man to choose her because he loved her. Rory released a long sigh of frustration. Why did her life seem so topsy-turvy lately? Why did the things that she wanted seem to come to her in different ways than she expected? Looking up and past the tops of the tall poplar trees, she said a quick prayer. She needed all the help she could get to figure out what to do next. Turmoil churned in her belly at Gabe's unconventional request. What she really needed was to talk to Roselle. Throughout the years, she'd often talked to her friend when she needed advice. She needed to regain some perspective. Roz was a good friend and would listen to her and offer advice. Maybe she could set up a time later when they could chat online. As Rory neared the cottage, she was surprised to see men working around their yard. They were setting up lights and rounded cameras onto steel poles that they placed around the perimeter of the yard. These must be the men that Gabe had hired. Looking over at their cottage and the rest of their backyard, she imagined what it must look like to a visitor. Blackened grass and ruined outbuildings made it look like their house and yard had been in a war zone. The voice inside her head gave her a gentle reminder. Gabe hired these men to add security cameras, Rory. Don't dwell on the bad. Instead, focus on the good. You have lots of reasons to be grateful. For the first time, someone else was helping to look out for her and her aunts, and it felt really good. She hadn't realized what a weight she carried with her fears for her aunt's safety. Next time she saw Gabe, she would thank him again. Quickly, she realized he wouldn't only want her thanks, but her answer. For the first time, she wondered if a marriage in name only might be a good idea. Gabe was continually doing things to help protect them all. By marrying him, it would solve her biggest concern for her aunt's safety. Even if Gabe didn't love her, they would have his protection for 1 year, and maybe by that time, they would discover who was behind all the problems on the island. Rory was still pondering all these questions when her dogs ran up to her, each of them vying for her attention. They licked her hands, and she patted their heads. Hurrying into the house, she spotted Aunt Florrie standing at the kitchen island, mixing a batch of cookie batter. Rory reached a finger into the bowl, nibbling on the sweet batter. Yum! Grinning, Aunt Florrie lightly smacked her hand with a spatula when she tried to reach for more. Don't spoil your supper, my dear. Please, just one more taste, Aunt Florrie. All right, I never could say no to your wheedling ways. Her aunt eyed her. Did you enjoy sailing with Gabe? The twinkle in her aunt's eye made Rory want to play it down. Her 3 aunts had always had such great hopes for her and Gabe Stevenson. She didn't want to get their hopes up. It was all right. Rory shrugged and saw the disappointment on Aunt Florrie's face. But we might go again soon. I need to relearn how to sail. Her aunt's face brightened a little when she heard that. Rory reached her finger into the mixing bowl once more and licked the batter off her fingers. Thanks. You're the best, Aunt Florrie. She kissed her aunt's cheek and hurried up the stairs to her room. Quickly, she changed into her old jeans and sweatshirt and sent a quick message to Roselle. There was no response, so Rory sent another message to ask if they could talk this evening. Since Rory didn't know when her friend would get back to her, today was a good day to mix the little bit she had left from the hand-harvested seaweed. She would need to go to the greenhouse to see if she could salvage anything from the empty bottles she kept there. Rory had noticed her aunt's rosacea and eczema were acting up again. It was critical that she make a larger batch of the skincare cream mixture. It was mostly for her aunts, but there was also the summer festival in Paradise Lake to think about. The festival was in 3 weeks, and there were quite a few people who were counting on her to bring the cleaners, moisturizers, toners, facial oils, serums, masks, and other treatments she had formulated. Since the fire had ruined everything, she was desperate. Rory grabbed the bottles of essential oils she kept in her room and brought them downstairs to the laundry room. She would have to do her mixing in here. After gathering what she needed, she hurried outside. A loud crack of thunder split the sky, spurring her to make a beeline for the greenhouse. The building was all but destroyed since the fire, but Rory wanted to see if any of the bottles she had kept underneath the large steel galvanized bowl were salvageable. Stepping carefully into the blackened walls of what used to be the greenhouse, she walked across the hard dirt toward the other end where she had kept the bowl. Slipping gloves onto her hands, she squatted and reached over to grab the edge of the bowl, lifting it. She breathed a sigh of relief at the sight of the glass bottles. They were dirty, but untouched by the fire. Dragging the galvanized steel tub towards her, she put the glass jars inside. As she reached for the last jar, she noticed a small piece of paper inside. Pulling out the paper, she turned it over and read in a shaky whisper, "Rory, your 21st birthday is soon. We won't forget." She sucked in a quick breath. Her hands shook as she held the slip of paper and stared at the words. It was obvious this was the same person, or people, who had set the fire in the first place. Who would do this? It seemed fairly clear that whoever wrote this note was someone who knew her, or at least knew when her birthday was. Trembling, she put the note in her pocket. She couldn't let her aunts see this. It would only make them worry more. Standing on shaky legs, she carried the tub of glass jars into the house. Thunder cracked loudly, and the rainstorm poured down on her like a forewarning of things to come. Rory hurried into the house through the kitchen door and set the tub down in the laundry room. After changing into dry clothes, she went to work mixing the skincare formula. At her best estimate, this new mixture would last about 2 weeks. She desperately needed to find some place where she could get a whole lot of seaweed and other sea plants in big batches. If she could find a solution to that problem, she'd have enough to create a formula that would last for months, and she could bring boxes of bottled skin creams to people in Paradise Lake who were asking for more. Rory thought about how to solve this problem as she worked. After a few hours, she was finally done. Hurrying to her room, she checked if her friend had messaged her. Opening her computer, she saw Roz's familiar script. "I'd love to chat, Rory. I'm here now, Roz. Thanks for taking a few minutes of your day. I have to admit, I'm a little frazzled today." "What's up, Rory?" "Well, lately there has been some weird things happening on the island." "Oh, like what?" "Well, whoever destroyed our backyard also left a note. I found it today." Rory went on to describe the threatening words. "Rory, you have to let the police know." "I will, but first I want to show the note to Gabe, because he hired a private investigator to search for clues as to how the fire started. Maybe the PI will be able to help with this, too." "That's a good idea, Rory. This needs to be figured out, though, before your birthday." "Yes, I agree, but I feel like the PI will be the biggest help." Rory hesitated for a moment. "Also, I need your advice, Roselle." "Of course. What's up, Rory?" "Gabe took me sailing today, and then he shocked me when he asked me to marry him." Rory explained Walker Stevenson's will and about Gabe's request for a marriage in name only. "Gabe did what? That's sudden." "It is, and I don't mind saying I'm still in shock." "Well, I think you should do it, Rory. I think you should marry Gabe." "What? Why do you think I should marry him?" "Rory, you've been in love with Gabe Stevenson over half of your life. He asked you to marry him, and you said no?" "Well, I said I'd think about it. Gabe said he needed an answer in 2 days." "Then you should say yes, Rory. You should marry him. You would finally be married to the man you've dreamed about for so long." "Yes, I know, Roselle. But would I be the only one in love? I wanted to marry a man who loved me, too." Rory wanted that love and sense of belonging so badly she could taste it. "You know what I think? I think Gabe is half in love with you already, Rory, but he doesn't know it. He has promised to protect you, and he's giving you money, too. I wouldn't be surprised if he'll find a way to help you figure out a solution to get the sea plants you need." "I suppose that's true. Maybe I just need to think of this marriage of convenience the same way Gabe does, as a practical solution to get what we both need. If it will help my aunts, then I will do this. Besides, it's only for 1 year." "There you go, Rory. And just for the record, my friend, I think you're going to discover that you love being married to Gabe." Maybe. But I think that's what I'm afraid of," Rory replied. In all honesty, it was one of her biggest fears to love a man who didn't love her back. She still remembered being 5 and 6 years old Her father disappeared for weeks on end, and her mum had been desperately lonely. Maybe her memories weren't as clear as what actually happened, but that was the impression that lingered with her from when she was a little girl. Now those same memories caused her to think that any man she married might not love her and want to be with her as much as she needed him. No fear, Rory. Just watch and see what happens. It won't be long before Gabe realizes he's in love with you. I don't think that's going to happen, but I appreciate the sentiment, Roz. Aunt Mary opened her bedroom door to tell her it was time for dinner. I've got to go, Roselle. Chat later? Of course, my friend. Rory closed the laptop and sat for a minute thinking of her chat with Roz. Her friend seemed fairly confident that Gabe would marry her and then fall in love with her. She shook her head, certain that wouldn't happen. No, a marriage of convenience with Gabe would satisfy her if he saw to it that her aunts were protected. That would have to be enough. Rory desperately tried to convince herself, but failed. She wanted so much more. Nerves fluttered all up her legs and arms as Rory approached Walker Stevenson's hunting lodge. Morning dew clung to her shoes from last night's rain as she trudged through the grass. It was a good mile walk from the cottage up to the small hill to the large house that Walker Stevenson built. Gabe had planned to talk to her in a couple of days, but she couldn't wait. Since finding that alarming note yesterday, anxiety coiled like a tight knot in her belly. She had hardly slept last night because of it, and she knew she couldn't go another day without talking to Gabe. Approaching the lodge, she spied the same workers who had been at the cottage the last couple of days. They were setting up steel poles to hold the hidden cameras all around the perimeter. Rory walked around the building until she saw Gabe. He was busy talking with an older man who wore a hard hat and tool belt. Curious, Rory walked closer to Gabe, waiting in the shadows until he finished his conversation. It wasn't long before Gabe spotted her. His gaze ran up and down the length of her and settled on her face. Rory hoped his wide grin and the hint of appreciation that glimmered in his blue eyes meant she wouldn't mind her interrupting his day. She noticed the old pair of jeans he wore and the Seahawks t-shirt that looked like it had seen better days. It annoyed her that he always looked good, even wearing ratty clothes. He walked towards her with his rogue smile firmly in place. Rory, this is a nice surprise. I didn't expect to see you until tomorrow. Yeah, well, I didn't expect it either, Gabe. But I felt it was important that I talk to you today. Rory looked at the dozens of workers all around them before peering up at Gabe. It looks like you're busy. I'm just making some plans to renovate this place, as well as sorting out ideas for the resort on the other side of the island. A resort? That's a big project. Rory tried to picture it in her mind's eye. Yes, it is a big project. That's why I've been asking Bob, my general contractor, for his ideas on where we should start with such a big project. Gabe nodded and grinned at the man with whom he'd just finished talking. He looked over at Rory, a new glow in his eyes. I can tell you're excited, Gabe. I guess I am. It's something that's been in the back of my mind now for about a year or two. Rory tried to ignore the sudden wave of apprehension that flooded her to hear Gabe talk about adding a resort to their island. It was her home, and she worried about being invaded by tourists. Gabe folded his arms across his chest. I know that look, Rory. Don't worry, I intend to keep half of the island private. It's only the southern half of Walker's Island that I'm thinking of making into a resort area. It's annoying how you do that, you know, Gabe. Rory shifted on her feet, a little intimidated that her very thoughts seemed to be an open book to Gabe Stevenson. What, Rory? Read your mind? Gabe chuckled. We spent a lot of summers together, Rory. I know you better than you think. Belatedly, she realized just how true his words were. She wasn't sure why that made her uncomfortable. Maybe it was the fact that Gabe might know some of her secrets. It made her feel like running for cover. The loud banging of a hammer in the background interrupted their conversation. Not wanting to compete with the noise, Rory leaned over and spoke in Gabe's ear. Can we go and talk somewhere private? Do you want me alone already, Rory? Gabe grinned as she grimaced and put her hands on her hips. He pointed in the direction of Gran's old hunting lodge. Rory hurried beside him, heat rising from her neck to her cheeks at his teasing. Gabe opened the door as Rory spoke. "I have something serious I want to discuss with you." Gabe closed the large rustic wood front door behind them, and leaning up against it, he spoke, his tone apologetic. "I'm sorry, Rory. I don't mean to get you riled. You're just so easy to tease." Gabe held his hand out for her to walk ahead of him up the stairs and into the large great room. She nodded and offered him a half-smile as her acceptance of his apology. They walked into the warmth of the great room. "I've always loved this room." "I know, me too. I can't bring myself to change anything about it. It has too many memories, I suppose." Gabe's expression turned nostalgic, as if remembering the past. Rory had some pretty great memories of her own. "Your great-grandfather would invite my 3 aunts and I over when he was on the island. I still remember Walker Stevenson sitting in that easy chair over there by the fireplace, smoking his pipe or whittling on whatever new wooden toy he was making at the time. It's funny, but I can still smell the scent of his pipe in this room." Rory looked over at Gabe, surprised to see the moisture in his eyes. "Me too, Rory," he said in a hushed whisper. The somber moment seemed appropriate for both of them. Gabe walked over to the fireplace and added a log to the crackling fire. "Sit down and relax, Rory. You look a little tense." Rory grabbed a large cushion and placed it farther away from the fireplace. Being near the fire still filled her with fear, and she preferred not to be too close. "Thanks, Gabe." As she watched the flames get higher, her mind filled with all that she needed to tell Gabe. "So tell me what's got you so worked up, Rory." Gabe's warm breath whispered in her ear. Rory turned, not realizing he sat nearby. He handed her a glass of orange juice. She took a sip and reached into her pocket, handing him the note. "What's this?" Gabe turned it over, and he read the jagged words. She watched as Gabe's face switched from serene to angry in a moment. "Who wrote this? It sounds like they are threatening you." "I don't know, Gabe, but I wanted you to see it. I thought maybe you could show that note to the private investigator you hired." Rory couldn't help but notice that Gabe's protective attitude towards her made her feel good inside. "Don't worry, I will show it to him. Where did you find it?" Rory explained about looking for more bottles in their small burned-out greenhouse. "Seems like whoever is doing this has been watching you for a while now, Rory. They know where you keep things that are important to you." A chill ran up her spine at Gabe's words. She had avoided saying that out loud. Now that it was out there, it felt more real. Someone really was stalking her and trying to hurt her. She stared at the flames, fear tightening its grip on her once again. "Do you know what they mean when they say they won't forget?" Gabe's soft voice barely reached her, so deep was her fear. With gentle fingers under her chin, he turned her head and looked deep into her eyes. A single tear ran down her cheek as she slowly shook her head. "It'll be okay, Rory. Come here." Gabe pulled her into his arms, and she cried softly onto his wide shoulders. All the pent-up tension began to drain from her as she wept softly. He drew her closer until she was sitting on his lap, and he kissed the top of her head. "I'll see to it that you'll be safe, Rory. Don't worry." "I know you will." Rory pulled back a little and wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get all weepy on you." "It's all right, Rory." Gabe's beautiful blue eyes were filled with warmth as he stared at her. There's one more thing I want to tell you." Rory hesitated, and he waited patiently for her to go on. She worked up the courage to tell Gabe her decision. "I've thought about your offer, and I will accept with one condition." "What's that?" "All I ask is that my aunts don't find out that this is a marriage in name only." Rory watched as Gabe finally nodded. "I agree, and the same holds true for my family. My mom and grandparents need to believe we married for love. So we agreed?" "Yes." Suddenly Rory smiled as a memory lingered in the back of her mind. Besides, you did promise a frightened 6-year-old that when she was older you would marry her and keep her safe." Rory grinned at the memory of the wide-eyed boy back then who had looked so uncertain as he saw the new girl in tears. She had cried in fear and misery at the recent loss of her parents. Being suddenly thrust onto this island with 3 aunts she didn't know very well, her mom's sisters, had made her feel insecure. It had all been very new and overwhelming. Rory had been so fearful, but Gabe had spent time with her and shown her things on the island, which helped to calm her fears and make this her home. But at the same time, Gabe had also promised to marry her if she was still scared when she grew up. Gabe's expression shifted, his blue eyes gleaming as he stared into hers. "You're right, I did make that promise." All of a sudden the room seemed to spark with the electricity of their attraction. Gabe's hand brushed against her arm and moved up to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I did make that promise. Now I intend to keep it." A sizzling trail of heat burned her skin wherever he touched her. Rory grew nervous as his gaze moved down to her lips. She suddenly became very aware of the fact that she was still sitting on his lap. Scurrying over to her cushion, Rory searched for anything that would divert his attention from her. With shaky hands, she reached for her glass of orange juice and took a sip. After a minute, she started babbling again. "Well, I'm glad we got that settled, Gabe." "Not quite settled, I'm afraid. We still need a date. I think we should get married next week." Gabe sounded very confident in his decision. Rory thought of her aunts, uncertain of their response. "I'm not sure how I'll be able to explain our quick wedding to my aunts." "We'll tell both of our families that we fell in love and didn't want to wait." Rory shot Gabe a nervous smile and quickly nodded. She hoped they would both be very good at acting like a couple in love. For Rory's part in this fake marriage, she knew she wouldn't be acting. She was very much afraid she was falling in love.